A very good morning, afternoon, and evening to you all, and thanks for joining the CDDF webinar on the EU HTA regulation. I am Dr. Rosa Giuliani. I'm a medical oncologist, and I'm very interested in drug development from all its process from the lab to the approval of drugs, and moderating this webinar with me today there is Dr. Christian Schneider. I will introduce him in a few minutes, and as you can see we have a very distinguished list of panelists that will guide us through the major steps and achievement and expectation that we all may have towards the HTA regulation, which actually was implemented exactly 2 months ago. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with the Cancer Drug Development Forum, CDDF is a non-profit organization that is meant to provide a neutral platform to stimulate the discussion and the interaction between different stakeholders who are involved in cancer drug development. Hence, you can see the discussion among academics, industry, patients, advocacy groups, HTA bodies, and regulators. And if you want to know more about CDDF, please do not hesitate to go to the website. Next slide, please. The discussion that we are having today is under the Chatham House rule that I'm sure you all are familiar with. And this includes, of course, also colleagues joining us from participants on social media. Next slide, please. Now, before entering the lively discussion, what I'm sure will be a very lively discussion, some technical direction. If you have any problems in following the discussion, the visual problem, hearing problem, anything, please use the chat function. However, for any question, comment, idea that you want to share, please use the Q&A function that will be moderated for the entire duration of the webinar, and your question or comments will be basically presented to the speaker and panelist. Next slide, please. And now I think it's really my pleasure again to welcome you all to the webinar. As you can see, this is the structure that we thought could be very functional to a very lively interaction. So after my introduction, we will have, let's say, the presentation, some introductory remarks from the 3 speakers. And then we hope we have enough time to have the discussion and to, let's say, address the topics or the comments that you think are more relevant with respect to the implementation of the HTA regulation. I can tell you, I'm going to wait for the fireside chat, but I can tell you that this topic basically is the implementation of the HTA regulation is eagerly awaited as a possible solution to the problems that as clinicians we are experiencing in our clinical practice, specifically in terms of access for patients to drugs that can actually be really very relevant to the cancer patient history. So I have personally very high expectation, but I don't want to spoil any of the discussion that we have in later. And I'm going to add now the mic to my co-moderator, Christian Schneider. Christian, it's over to you.
Thanks, Rosa, and welcome everyone also from my side. I'm Christian Schneider, Chief Medical Officer at consulting company Cencora Pharmalex. Today I'm here in my function as being on the board of directors of the CDDF, and again, I'm co-chairing this together with Rosa. I'm an ex-EU regulator I've been working in various national regulatory authorities, and I was a member or chair in various EMA committees and working parties. So this is a bit of a dream come true for me today. When I was a, should we say, young regulator back in the olden days, I should say, I was always thinking to myself, if the decisions we were taking for regulatory approval would actually also result in access to patients, what would come afterwards? Would the payers accept treatments, especially if they were very expensive? We were not allowed to really take that into account, I would think. But of course, it is an important aspect, as we all know. And of course, if we found the evidence adequate, could there be any doubt at all? And are we, as regulators, actually with our requirements also driving up the price? There were many questions at the time, I thought to myself. And now with the HTA regulation, there is actually a tool, and there's a lot of science and common sense in this. And we are shedding light on this today with 3 excellent speakers. I'm really looking forward to the discussion between the experts. And I'd like to hand over now to Niklas Hedberg, who is Chief Pharmacist at the Swedish National Governmental Authority, TLV. He's the co-chair of the HTA coordination group and has really broad experience in many aspects of value-based evaluation in HTA. Niklas, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. And now I have the challenging task to try to explain the new regulation in 5 minutes, but there will be time for fireside chat afterwards anyway. So I jump straight into, after this introduction, and jump straight into the first slide, or the next slide. This is the organogram to describe the structure of how we work now under the new regulation. So the decision-making body under the HTA is the Member State Coordination Group, where, as the introduction said, I am one of two co-chairs. We have one chair from Ireland and co-chairs from Sweden and Italy. The coordination group works with both medical products and medical devices in one joint configuration. And we have set up 4 subgroups where the actual work has been done in preparing and will be done in executing. So joint clinical assessments, I think that's where we might spend most of the time today. Joint scientific consultations, very important earlier on in the development phase. Identification of emerging health technologies really early on. And of course, methodology. What do we need to put down as a basis for this work and agree upon among the member states? And I will come back to the methodology and the building blocks from that group in a moment. We are supported very much and very efficiently by a secretariat situated at the European Commission. That's both administrative support, technical support. They are responsible for the IT support, etc. And at the far bottom, there is the HTA IT platform that is now up and running for a number of purposes. That is where all the communication between different stakeholders or different partners will happen. So that's where we'll put our work together. What's interesting with this is also on the right-hand side, the HTA stakeholder network. So the regulation now formally gives a role for example, patients, clinical experts in these processes. And the stakeholder network meets twice a year, but also will have their contact through the IT platform. I can have the next slide. Yes. So when we have new legislation in EU, I think it's fair to talk about first, second, and third legislation. So the regulation is as it is. That's the one that is decided between the Parliament, the European Council of Ministers, and the Commission. But then underneath that are the implementing regulation, and that will be shown on next slide as well. So secondary legislation, the implementing acts. We don't have any delegated acts in this legislation if you're well known to the EU system, but the implementing act. And then third level, we have the guidance documents written and provided by the coordination group, and coming back especially by the methodology subgroup. All of these documents that you need can be found on the website linked here. But to understand them, you might need to listen into a number of webinars or workshops of this, of which this is one. So that's also one of the reasons for me being here. I can have the next slide. Yes, this is the list of the implementing acts. So you see that on the legislative level, we have now structured and set up the rules for how to do, which are the procedure rules for a joint clinical assessment, which are the rules for the cooperation with the EMA, the management of conflict of interests, and the joint scientific consultations. We have also come to the joint scientific consultations on medical devices and in vitro diagnostics. What we're still waiting for a few weeks more is the JCA procedure rules for medical devices. But in a very close future, everything will be in place, and the first 5 ones we are already working with and from. I can have the next slide. Yes, and to put this on a timeline with the example from a joint clinical assessment, we will have the startup phase, we will have the scoping phase when we define the European PICO. We'll probably come back to that in both the presentations and the discussion. We will have the time for the submission dossier, the drafting of for writing up the dossier, the drafting of the clinical assessment report, and finalizing the joint clinical assessment report. And next slide, please. And you see this is where the implementing acts come in. So in general, all of the time, but we also have annexes in the implementing acts at specific times. Next slide, please. And here are the procedural and methodological guidelines from the coordination group. So you see which documents you can find on the website and exactly when to apply them in this time frame when you need to do your work to either plan for, prepare, or do your actual joint clinical assessment work. Next slide. And this is a more detailed timetable. I will not go into each of these levels because I'm already over time, I think. But this is to show you that almost every day in this time span is planned. There is something that needs to happen almost every week to make sure that we keep our timelines. And there are only 2 that are a bit longer. That's the time when the health technology developer, meaning the company, prepares the dossier, and when the agencies write down the assessment report. Those are 100 days each. Otherwise, you see, it's a very, very tight timeline. But this is what we will take on to make sure that we can provide high and efficient assessments to the benefit of European patients, citizens, and enterprises. I think that was my last slide. Thank you. There will be much more to say in the fireside chat.
Thank you, Niklas. Brilliant presentation. We'll save questions from participants to the fireside chat, I would think. So please submit them. Now handing over to Michael Berntgen, head of the Scientific Evidence Generation Department at the European Medicines Agency. His department supports obviously generation of robust and relevant scientific evidence, also in collaboration, which is really important, a really key function at the agency. And Michael has always been instrumental in collaborating with the HTA bodies and payers. So really looking forward to your participation and your presentation. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Christian, and good day, colleagues. It's fantastic to be on this call here and to introduce this new piece of legislation in Europe, which I would always call groundbreaking. And even if from a regulatory perspective, I'm now talking about the interface between the regulatory and the HTA processes, I think it's something which really colleagues should be aware of in detail. So just by means of background, we have been working between the regulatory constituency and the HTA constituency already since 2010 together. And it has therefore a long experience how EMA and then UNETA have been discussing topics of mutual interest. What the HTA regulation does is it brings these experience that we have been making together on a legal footing. And that's why I personally believe it is so exciting to see this work translated from project work into a legal framework. And of course, the aim at the interface, the aim of our collaboration at the regulatory HTA interface is to build synergies along the medicine's life cycle. Therefore, there are in the regulation 3 different areas where we work together. And this is on the next slide displayed, which you will be happy to hear is my only slide that I have for today. But these are the 3 buckets. And if you take anything away from this talk, then just keep this in mind here. We are going to work together in the context of joint scientific consultations, which when regulators are going to be involved, they become parallel joint scientific consultations. This is basically evidence planning, or what in the regulatory field we call scientific advice. The other area we are going to work on together is on the identification of emerging technologies and contribution to work plans, where EMA provides specific information to the HTA colleagues for the planning purposes. And last but not least, which will be now, I guess, also the focus of many of the discussion, is the contribution to joint clinical assessment. Now here, a very important notion, which is also relevant for the joint scientific consultation. Joint in this context always refers to work amongst HTA bodies. It is not joint between regulators and HTAs, because particularly in the joint clinical assessment, that would conflict the remits. So keep in mind, joint clinical assessment is the work amongst the HTAs. Coming to that output, regulators contribute, and this is in parallel to the assessment process, which was displayed by Niklas earlier. There are transversal elements which are going to support all the work we are doing here, including the sharing of confidential information. But again, when it comes to the interface between the centralized procedure, so the benefit risk assessment by regulators on the one hand, and by the joint clinical assessment by the HTAs under the new regulation, this is running in parallel whilst respecting the remits of the two decision makers. There are specific sets of information which we are going to provide from the regulatory review to the HTA review. And that's described in one of the implementing acts, which has been referred to by Niklas previously. There is the information about and the notification about the submission of marketing authorization applications in scope of JCA production. There is information about a positive validation and timelines. And then during the assessment, there's also the need to provide updates on timelines and on substantial questions or outstanding issues impacting the therapeutic indication. Plus, of course, the final provision of the CHMP opinion. Why is this so important? It is important because these parallel processes are interlinked in that the output from the HTA colleagues, the actual JCA, needs to be published within 30 days of the commission decision from the regulatory review, concluding basically on the marketing authorization. And there is therefore a time dependency and to some degree also a content information that needs to fly to be provided to the HTA colleagues, because the therapeutic indication from the regulatory side does, of course, influence the assessment scope. And I guess we're going to discuss this further in the fireside chat. But let me conclude just by raising again the awareness to something which we have together implemented already in June last year, which is a parallel notification process whereby the developer or the future applicant will need to notify both EMA but also the HTA Secretariat of an upcoming application for marketing authorization in scope of JCA production. And this was jointly communicated. It's extremely important for both secretariats to have this information early, and to prepare ourselves for the next steps. And with this, I just close at this point and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was very clear. And now we move to the third introductory remarks. And our next speaker is Vanessa Schaub. Vanessa is an health economist by training, and she is currently the head of the global EU HTA strategy at Roche. And in her role, she has the difficult task to ensure fit-for-purpose global HTA strategy to stay ahead of emerging health system trends and patient needs globally. So I think it's a very relevant and difficult task. So Vanessa, now it's over to you for the remarks before we move to the fireside chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosa. Thank you so much to CDDF for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be with all of you and talk a little bit through our perspectives on the European HTA regulation. Let me start maybe with a personal remark. It's 25 years ago that I finalized my PhD on cross-border healthcare in Europe. And now it's reality. So I can tell I'm really passionate and excited about seeing that being brought to life. And I want to ground us today, before we start with our fireside chat, into the objectives of the regulation. So what do we want to achieve with this, and why this has taken us here? So we have to, I think, acknowledge that we were coming from a situation where we had 27 different procedures in our 27 member states in Europe, a lot of duplication, a lot of different evidence requirements, methods, and different conclusions as well. And we are now at the state to say that we are actually having already, since 12th of January, the status where we envision one single European-wide HTA clinical assessment and also a unified scientific advice platform moving forward. And the opportunities are clearly here on the table. It's about enhancing innovation, simplifying processes and avoiding duplication across member states, reducing the inequity in Europe for patient access to medical and device innovations. And ultimately, with all of this achieved, we would also have the opportunity to accelerate patient access in Europe. And coming from an industry perspective, I can say that Roche is fully vested into the vision of European HTA, making this a reality. Also, I think there is a call out to increase the competitiveness of Europe overall on the global scale. And the European HTA regulation has the potential to do this. Also, I think we need to be mindful, and maybe we will get to this in more detail in our fireside chat as well, that we shouldn't take for granted that all these opportunities and benefits of the regulation will just happen automatically. So there is also a risk in implementing the regulation and in how we do that this would come with actually basically the opposite of what we want to achieve and what was the objective of the regulation in the first place. So we see a couple of things here. You might have heard high number of PICOs. You might have heard methodological challenges. You might have also heard about limited capacity in the joint scientific consultation space. And this is indeed also where Michael shared before, increasing the predictability for evidence generation planning really early on, jointly with HTA authorities and parallel jointly with regulators and HTA authorities, where I see a strong benefit of the regulation, which we need to make sure is really also brought to life. And last but not least, of course, accelerating patient access also depends on the readiness of the member states in Europe. And here we see also some situations where we actually run the risk to rather delay. Can you please give me the next slide? Thank you. Because we are fully vested into the vision of the European HTA regulation to deliver timely assessments on the large scale on the European level, to also then unlock patient access earlier on, we started really early to prepare for this. And we invested a lot from our end to get ourselves also internally ready. So we did a couple of pilots. This is not even mentioned here on the slide under the UNETA framework before. And that, I think, has helped us to very quickly also unlock our internal preparedness starting in 2022, where we built a cross-functional team together with our regulatory colleagues, our medical colleagues, our 25 European affiliates, and many more functions to really look into how to build a successful internal operating model. We revised a couple of our internal processes, built new capacity, created new capacity and new roles. Submission leads are one of them. And in the last year, we pressure tested this model already, and we started with our very first submission team to get prepared for the assessments to come in this year and beyond. And I think there will be many opportunities in our fireside chat to give a little bit more color to all we did in the past to make sure we are ready for the new requirements and also the new expectations with European HTA. And you can give me the last slide, please. And these are our internal critical success factors we have identified along our internal journey of getting ready for European HTA. I think what's important to note that we need to think differently and create a mindset shift in our organization when it comes to the importance of regulatory bodies and HTA bodies. These are equally important external stakeholders we need to fully account for in our early drug development process up until launch and beyond. Starting early here is key, and again, joint scientific consultations can be key to get us all together better prepared for very difficult evidence questions to solve for in the very early stage if we get that right. Also, there is an element of key partnerships here, and as Michael shared the interfaces between EMA and HTA authorities in Europe, one of our internal key partnerships in our organization is for sure the collaboration between access colleagues and regulatory colleagues in those two departments, really working seamlessly hand in hand because procedures are intertwined. The second key partnership is between the global team and the affiliates, because we need to make sure that what we do on the European level is also enabling our affiliates for the subsequent step of reimbursement and price decisions in the local markets. Anticipation of PICOs, there is an element of digitalization and artificial intelligence maybe here as well. I'm happy to give a little bit more information on this one in the chat in the interest of time. And also, of course, what will be important is for us to stay involved with policy. And that's maybe the second last topic here on the slide. Because the regulation now is being brought to life, we will learn, we hopefully will accelerate learnings, adopt things when we see they are not going in the right direction. But we need to do this with a very strong external focus. We need to continue talking to each other and helping ourselves understand where we need to maybe pivot and turn around and where we can continue delivering on the European HTA framework as it is carved out right now. All in all, I'm positive to see that being brought to life finally after my 25 years ago PhD on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. And so This leads us to the section of the fire chat, and now we are finally free to, to take advantage of these excellent panelists and speakers, and to ask all the questions that we want, to make all the comments that we want, and we share, our perspective too. I remind everybody that you can post your question anytime in the Q&A session. And I actually would like to start. I can see all panelists now in the video. If I take the women first, so I take the privilege of starting with the question, and I'll start from the chat. And the first question from Sunira One is, it would be great to hear what the experience has been so far, both in terms of the joint scientific consultations or the scoping phase, okay? What have been some of the challenges that you faced? Any practical experience that you can share would be useful. Actually, this reminds me that the chat is meant to be, this fire chat is meant to be very informal, and if possible, also quite pragmatical. So anything that you can share from your direct experience would be really, really nice. So who does want to start? Niklas, I'm looking at you actually.
Yeah, thanks. And that's, of course, a very, very relevant and urgent question. But I think that the true answer is it is put out a little bit too early, because we have now closed our first submission period for the joint scientific consultations, but we haven't gone out public with the number of applications. And we are, when it comes to joint clinical assessments, we are depending on when the companies apply to the EMA, and they also have timelines for that. So the first ones will be made public quite soon, both for JSC and JCA. But right now we are still in the waiting phase window. So to put it out there, I was saying to people this fall that the next important date was actually the coordination group meeting in November, because that was when we finalized all our guidance documents. January 12 was more like, celebrating an even birthday, turning 40 or 50 or something like that. It didn't really feel very different the day after. But now we come to the next very important date. That is when we can actually start working with both first consultations and first assessments. But this fireside chat is just in the middle of that timing. So we will have to talk more broadly.
Is there any comment? I do not know. Vanessa or Michael, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything. May I ask you a very, very silly question? Okay, so I do not know, maybe it's a bit of a generic question, but may I ask all of you, what are you most excited about the new, the new regulation? What it is, yeah, I know it's a silly question, but actually I think it's a relevant question. So just tell us.
I can give it a start, Rosa. So really, I'm a very convinced European citizen, and I see a massive potential in bringing Europe together when it comes to patient access and how we look at clinical benefit for patients based on innovative medical products or medical devices, because let's not forget the regulation is also for medical devices. And there is an immense potential for all of us, I think, to harmonize expectations, requirements when it comes to clinical benefit assessments. There's also immense potential in accelerating and reducing fragmentation and duplication within Europe. And I'm looking at Michael here a little bit. We have done that in the regulatory field a couple of decades ago, right? So, and I don't know why we shouldn't be successful in the field of HTA likewise. So that's really where I'm passionate about. And maybe there's one element, and this is indeed the early opportunity to engage with regulators and HTA authorities in parallel joint scientific consultations. What we do not get right there, we cannot really solve at a later stage. From an HTD perspective, we would want to have the full transparency early on, what is required, and also discuss really hot topics, how to go about evidence generation for ATMPs. These are critical questions, I think, where we can get our heads together to solve them. And here I stop to give opportunity for others to chime in.
Michael.
Yeah, no, thank you. And really building on what Vanessa was saying, and quoting Christian, in fact, with his introduction, saying a dream comes true. Because I think there is a really high degree of excitement, at least for my personal part in this one, whereby there is now a very strong foundation of this work, which we have been doing for so many years at the interface, regulatory HTA interface together, now in a legal context. And of course, a project framework, as it was previously, always has its limitation, including sustainability, including resources you get for it, and you need the coalition of the willing. I think there's a lot which can now be done on this legal footing together, because we're no longer in the project phase. And what I'm, of course, I'm excited about is that work is now happening, because we have been preparing for implementation. And again, I'm just seeing a very small part of it. Nicholas is far more at the heat of this work. But we are now going into operations, which of course is super exciting. The point where I'm really with Vanessa is this new framework helps us to shape that we get better evidence for the different types of decision making, because the challenges are not new. The challenges and which are to some degree also caused by different decision making remits, they are nothing particularly new, but we have a new way to also help developers, to help companies to generate the evidence that can really address the questions that we have from our respective remits, meaning from regulatory remit, but also HTA remit. So all in all, I would say the excitement is because this should lead to a benefit for patients, in that there is truly a facilitation of timely access for innovation that reaches then ultimately the patient. And that's what we are really, therefore, this is why this framework is so crucial.
If I'm the third to go there, I mean, I very much agree to what Vanessa and Michael have just said, but to also show excitement through the challenges, because we have been working with this for so many years, and I got really heavily involved in Unetta in 2006. That was quite late in the process. I had watched it from a national perspective far longer, but to realize now that when we have prepared this, and Vanessa was actually talking about it from all ends, from agencies, of course, from regulators, from companies, from patients, from clinicians, we have understood how challenging this will be. And I think, especially talking about the PICOs, we will come back to them, I suppose, for me and for the methodology, for the methods, we haven't really put anything new into the bin. We have just clarified, we have gathered everything in one place and clarified how the current landscape looks. And I think the excitement is that from there, the only way is forward. The only result can be almost a success, because we are not making it more complicated than it was, but by putting it in one place, everyone can see, and everyone can go back home and say, what can we do to contribute to a more unified European view? Where can we take our differences away? And that, once again, that is true. We already hear this from clinical experts talking about how they realize that they must write up clinical guidelines in the future. So
Very
that
good.
goes for all of us.
Very good. Thanks for that. I'd like to maybe raise a question that was asked by one from the audience. So it would be great to hear more about the use of digitalization, as mentioned in Vanessa's presentation, and in general, artificial intelligence in help navigating the HTA challenges. Is there any insight, or is that early to say?
I think, yeah, sorry, Vanessa, go first.
No, Niklas, please go ahead.
I think that is a bit early to say, and not to say too much. I think it's obvious for most people that the public use of AI is not the decision of the HTA agencies and HTA bodies in the different member states in Europe. We have EU governments that give their population and their agencies very different directions and restrictions today. And I don't think it's fair to blame the HTA agencies for that. So I'm not prepared to give any guidance as long as other countries' governments say things that are quite different from what the Swedish government is telling me. The Swedish government is telling me, you better speed up, because we as a country are going to be left behind in AI. But they don't say that without limits, of course. But that's just one of 27 examples.
Makes sense. Thanks, Niklas. Vanessa, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, so happy to elaborate a little bit more on, how we are looking at it. Considering the complexity of dealing with multiple PICOs at a very early point in time without having really an oversight very much to the point where we would need to start at risk. This comes, of course, with the perspective to see how we can raise efficiencies in looking into new technologies. And I mean, I think there are use cases maybe well known also here in the audience, mostly around systematic literature reviews. I think that's the most known use case. And PICO anticipation seems to be the second one now, kind of increasing to the top maybe. How to predict PICOs, right, based on algorithms and digital tools, including AI. I have to say, as a global player, we need to look at this. We need to be competitive, and we need to carefully think about how to leverage this, where to leverage this, and for what to leverage it. I can also say that in our past preparations with molecules leading up to a JCA in this year and beyond, we have done PICO anticipation with the help of our affiliates. So very tangibly down to earth without using digitalization yet, because we wanted to have a learning curve also in our organization first before applying digital tools. But in the future, I think that will be a path to more speed and more efficiencies. The question here, and this is coming to Niklas' point, all we do internally needs to be also accepted by the stakeholders and decision makers out there. So we would need to have a collective shared framework with HTA authorities, payers, the European Commission, etc., to really set a frame for us all to work collectively with the help of these tools and technologies, because otherwise we run into a situation where there is a lack of acceptability, and then it wouldn't help anybody, right? So the call out here is really to have such a unified framework. And we need to work on this, I think, for the future to really fully leverage also the opportunities in the technologies, and also being mindful of the pitfalls and the limitations and barriers of digitalization and AI.
Yep, makes perfect sense. I don't know, Michael, would you like to come in from your perspective on this?
Well, frankly, specific to the point of how it's been used in the HTA context, of course, I have nothing really to say in here. I see the use cases, but all I would say now, also in the interest of time, is maybe that what I hear as opportunities, but even as challenges, both from Niklas and Vanessa, does resonate with what we consider in the regulatory field. And I think that's not a surprise.
Makes sense. If I may, can I maybe pick up on something that you said before, that we should remember that we are doing this for patients, and that's obviously what we all agree for. Since this is for the Cancer Drug Development Forum, we're talking about cancer drugs, and they are also part of this now. What would you see are the positive aspects for patients? Of course, you've mentioned a lot there, but I don't know if anybody would want to add something what the patients can be really looking forward to now. I don't know, Vanessa, if you would like to start on that.
Sure. Happy to start with this, because this really is core and center, right? So if we look into the objectives of the regulation, it was about acceleration, patient access, and having a unified and harmonized look at the evidence basis to really unlock access for patients earlier and on a more solid evidence basis moving forward. And that comes to the discussion we had before on the predictability of evidence requirements, on joint scientific consultations, etc., etc. I also think, and I'm looking at Rosa here, for clinicians at the point of care with patients. So you are the one engaging with patients, right? So I hope for a solidified basis and understanding across Europe, where medical societies on the European level, I think, also have a role to play, to say this is where we see a high value and benefit of this therapeutic asset in the context of the treatment algorithm. And this is endorsed by a clinical assessment on the European level. So I see at the interface between clinicians and patients at the point of care also opportunities and advantages for patients.
I mean, guys, I waited so long for the implementation of this regulation and for having this very early dialogue with you all, which of course I'm now I have high expectation to have this, this dialogue. And actually what is really critical, it was really important from a clinician perspective, I assume for all of us, is to have also the scoping exercise. So let's not wait, for designing the where this treatment fits once we have already the treatments. Let's try to have the discussion even before, in order to develop drugs and devices that actually will fit even better the patient treatment trajectory. So I'm really, really, really waiting for this discussion. Thanks, Vanessa. I hope that we will be, as a clinician and patients, a relevant part of it.
I definitely agree, and that's a part we haven't talked so much about, how this will help shaping the future research and the future development of methodologies and drugs. I must, though, that is not part of the European remit, that is not part of the HTA, but at the end of the day, in member states and in regions and at hospitals, also, of course, the price, the cost of the treatments will play a role. So if patient access doesn't increase in a manner that meets everyone's expectations, it is not for sure, it's not a given that it is the regulation to blame. It might be the pricing or the budgeting systems or the financing systems in different parts of Europe. I just want to manage expectations. We talk about patient access, and that for me is we can guarantee the access of fair, high evidence knowledge and motivated decisions. That will for sure increase. If the actual drug access, pharma access, medical device access will increase, also depends on price and budgets.
Okay, I'm still keep my very high expectation, Niklas, but thank you for reminding me that I need to pay attention to the right process. Now, can I remain on these issues of the patient engagement, because we have a question from Birgit Wolf that is asking, and mainly to Niklas and Michael. Can you please comment on how patients would be more systematically integrated into the JSC process to provide patient perspective? And in case of GSC is in parallel with EMA or not?
Yeah, maybe I can give it a start here for this question, because I think it's a very important one to get the patient perspective included. And in fact, the whole JSC and also parallel JSC framework really builds on the experience that we have been making over so many years. And in fact, there have been in three-digit numbers types of parallel scientific advice procedures in the past. And we have had often patients involved in here. And I would say for the last ones that we have done also with UNETA 21, we had almost always patient involved in here. So there's a very strong call for having patient representatives in these discussions. And it's now, and this is why I'm coming back to this one, facilitated even more through a very strong legal basis, which also, particularly on the HTA side, demands such involvement. So I think the pieces are really coming together here. The experience on the one hand that we have been making, which has been very positive, and yet at the time on the project basis, at least from the framework, and now the framework on the legal basis, which allows us even to be stronger, and therefore also ensure that there is the patient perspective being involved in the evidence planning, because ultimately the evidence planning is so key. Vanessa was saying it several times. It's key for the products which of course are in scope of CDDF and which are in scope here of the initial phase of application of the legislation, treatment of cancer, I should say, to be precise, as well as ATMPs. Because we know also the challenges in evidence. We do know that regulators and HTAs have looked at certain evidence plans differently, although I can also say that we have been working quite closely on a technical level to better understand each other and to better also understand where we come from, different decision-making frameworks to these different solutions. But topics such as single-arm trials, topics such as surrogate endpoints, topics such as management uncertainties in conditional marketing authorization, which of course is a regulatory construct. All of these are very important. They need to be pre-discussed in parallel joint scientific consultation in the future. So it's really a call for developers to come forward. And of course, in those discussions, it is important to have the patient voice included.
Can I ask a question maybe? And I'm mindful of time, so maybe we need to have short answers on that one. We've heard that there is an expansion now towards all of Europe, and that is obviously a very good way forward. There is one question come up. If there are any specific challenges for PICOs foreseen on a global development, so taking one step further, or if national kind of shopping lists would hinder that. I don't know if anyone would like to make a start on that one.
Whoa, I don't know if I can comment that, especially not now. I don't know what's going to happen globally, but we will produce both scientific consultation reports, much less of that will be public, but joint clinical assessment reports in English. So I guess countries will reuse them in the feedback loops of that. I guess it will influence also the PICOs in the future, but I'm sorry, the question is a bit too big for me.
I understand. And maybe that is something that indeed will also depend a lot on the various global requirements. I think this is a huge step already now when we are on this. I
Sorry,
do
Christian.
wonder. Yes, sure, Rosa.
No,
Go
can I
ahead.
just make a comment? Because this PICO question, this PICO topic is really of interest to me and many others. So I totally get that there may be different standard. So I'm a medical oncologist, so I'm thinking of the population that I see. So I totally acknowledge that there are different standards in treatment in different countries. And this is unfortunately often caused by the price of drugs and the resources of the country. So it's not really that is different the problem, cancer, that type of cancer is that type of cancer, that population is that population, is that, difference were artificially generated, if you want, in terms of comparators and so on, by, the resources of the country. So if someone cannot pay for the product A, which is the last product approved, of course, they are going to give maybe a standard of treat or standard of care, which is appropriate for the economic resources of the country. But I think that this this is our opportunity also to ensure fairness in treating patients across Europe to begin with, and then worldwide. Don't you think so?
I agree, and that was partly what I meant with my last discussion. I think the regulation will be good in terms of highlighting also this. Once again, we cannot blame the regulation if we don't solve every problem, especially not the financial and budgetary ones. That is not to blame the regulation for, that has other, but we will not make it worse. We will rather make it better because it will be highlighted, it will be clarified and expressed in a better way and evidence-based.
I agree.
Maybe just one last comment based on Niklas. I think there is also an opportunity to harmonize and unify more how we look at, for example, populations and subpopulations, because this is not only dependent on which comparators are available in the local markets, it's also a methodological question how the HTA authority is looking at how to cut the population, right, based on the indication statement. And I think that's just one minor example in many more, maybe, where there is an opportunity to come better together. And as Niklas referred to before, how can we bring the 27 frameworks together? We now have a collection list of things and describing the status quo, bringing it to one place, but there hasn't been yet a real harmonization process. And I think that is the one I'm waiting for and hoping for, because with that, we will really get to a better place where we can leverage the objectives of the regulation fully in the interest of patients.
So I think I'm mindful of time, but if you allow me to ask a final question, and in one or two sentences, there has been a lot of discussions, but when something is new, there are also some fears with people. What are the biggest myths that need to be debunked in your mind? I'll start with you, Niklas.
I've said that before, that we are putting in new demands and new rules. We are not. We are just putting the existing ones together before we start sorting them out.
Very good. Michael?
Focusing on the regulatory HTA interface, there's 2 points which I hear frequently, and so let me just briefly address those. The first one being the exchange of confidential information between the regulatory network and the HTA network. And this is extremely important to have this opportunity to exchange confidential information between the public bodies structures. But at the same time, I would also say that here we have an implementing act describing very clearly what is the framework and in which context information is to be used. So that should be really reassuring to all the developers in this field. And the second point, to just briefly say about the different remits, which of course regulators and HTAs do have, and they have therefore different also decision criteria, and they have different evidence needs. But we do respect this in all the discussions we are also having in terms of operationalizing the work under the regulation, and particular at the interface between centralized procedure and JCA. So these requirements are being complied with.
Thanks, Michael. And last but not least, Vanessa.
Yeah, there seems to be a fear that we as HTDs are looking more or less opportunistically at PICOs, and this seems to be a reason also why involvement of industry into the PICO scoping process doesn't happen in the way we would have loved for. So we are fully aware that we need to answer policy-driven questions. It's not about a data-driven PICO approach. So we are ready to look into all the evidence sources which will help us to answer the PICO-related questions if quality of the evidence available allows for this in a mostly unbiased way. That's the disclaimer, right? It's not about hiding evidence. It's about bringing evidence to the table, which is worth making a decision upon.
Thank you. Indeed, that's an important point and a very good roundup. If you allow me a few closing remarks, and if colleagues could maybe bring the last two slides up while I'm just wrapping up. I think we have seen a clear agenda for opportunities. For many, I think a dream has come true with this. We heard about enhancing innovation, simplifying processes, joined up assessment with yet clearly defined remits and roles, and also finally to speed up patient access. We've seen a few challenges, but it's very clear that there is high awareness, willingness, and also momentum to tackle these. I think this has become very clear for me during this discussion, and this is a massive opportunity to bring Europe together. I like that aspect. I'm personally very convinced that the concert in diversity of opinions that we have seen at the CHMP and other committees, for example, that makes it so strong will also be a strength here. But we've also seen good planning is key. And I think that we are all well prepared. And I would really like to thank my co-chair, Rosa, and I would like to thank the three panelists for this excellent discussion, for your valuable contributions, not only obviously in this webinar, but also for the entire process. It's a lot of work, and I think you three have been key in this, and I think you should be thanked for this. And if you allow me, here on the presentation, you see two upcoming events. Please mark them in your diary. And of course, we are happy to get also some feedback. If you go to the last slide, please. There you can see that there is also a survey that you could scan and give us some feedback. We can only improve, and that would be very nice. So thank you all very much for the participation, and I wish you a very nice rest of the day. Thank you also from all of us. Bye.